Alright, so in this project we're going to be building an animated countdown, and what you're seeing right here is basically the final message or the final state. But if I click replay or I just reload the page, you can see we get a really cool looking animation from 3 to 0, and of course you could make it whatever numbers you want, whatever range you want, and it's something you could put before your website loads or before your application loads. We just have a very simple screen here, but this could be your website or whatever, and we can just click replay to make this keep happening. So what we're going to do here is deal with CSS animations, keyframes. We're going to be using the transform property with translate, rotate, scale, and then we're going to use some JavaScript to basically check certain conditions and either add or remove certain classes based on those conditions, because we need to know, should we add the in class or the out class to create the rotation, or should we stop it? Are we at the end of the numbers, and so on. So there's a little bit of logic that we have to add with JavaScript, but we'll be doing quite a bit with keyframes and animations. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so we're going to get started here. I have the final project open, and you'll see that there's basically two screens or two states. We have the countdown, and then we have this final message. So we're going to start off with the HTML, creating those two sections, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start to style it. So I just have my project starter boilerplate open here, and I'm just going to change the title to, let's say, animated countdown, and get rid of that H1. So basically, like I said, we have two sections. We have the counter, so that's going to be the numbers, and that's going to be the heading that says get ready. And then under that, so under that closing div, we're going to have a class of final, which is going to be that, the button, the replay, and so on. So inside counter, we want to have a class called nums. Okay, nums. So that's going to wrap the numbers, which are going to be in spans. So there's going to be 4 altogether, so we'll create 4 spans with the numbers 3, 2, 1, and 0. And what we want to do here, since we only want one number to show at a time, we're going to have a class of in, and ultimately whatever number has that class is going to be the number that comes in, that's showing. Okay, now under these spans and then under this div, we're just going to have in H4, and we're just going to say get ready. And then down here in the final class here, this div, we're going to put an H1, it says go, and we're going to have a button to replay it. So I'm going to give this an ID of replay so we can grab onto it in the JavaScript later on, and we'll just say replay. All right, so that should be it. Now we can see both sections, the counter and final right now, but we're going to only show one at a time, and we'll do that from within the CSS. So let's jump into the styling. So as far as the base styling here, one thing I'm going to do is get rid of the flex. We are going to have everything centered, but we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to use transform translate, so we can get rid of these lines here, and then the only other thing I want for the body is just to zero out the margin. Okay, now everything's going to get pushed up to the side. So let's start off here with the counter. So for the counter, I'm going to set the position to fixed. Okay, so this is another way you can center things. I'm going to set this to fixed, which just sets it fixed within the browser window. And we can set the positioning to top. I'm going to set it to 50% from the top, and then let's say we want it to go 50% from the left. So this puts it in the middle. However, when you do this, it puts the edge, the left edge, and the top in the middle. So it starts here. We want this entire thing to be shifted over and up into the, so the middle of this is in the middle of the screen. So to do that, we use transform, and then we can use translate. So translate without X or Y, we can do both X and Y values in here. And for both of those, we want to do negative 50%. And you'll see that once I save, it gets shifted up and over so that this is directly in the middle. And I just want to also text align to the center. Okay, so now we have that, good. So the next thing we'll do is let's position this. So this is the final class. So we'll go ahead and say final, and let's do the same thing. I'm actually going to copy, let's see, let's just copy all of this. Okay, that's going to basically position it in the same place as the counter. Now, as I said, we only want to show one of these at a time. So the way that this is going to work is the counter, the div that has the class of counter, will also at times have the class of hide for when we want to hide it. So let's go ahead and add the styling for the hide class. And the way that I want this to basically hide it is to scale it down to 0. So, and I'll actually show you. So as soon as this count ends, watch what happens. See how it kind of scales down and out, and then this scales up. So it kind of comes from nowhere. So that's what I want to do. And the way I'm going to do it is on this hide, we're going to set transform. And we want to just position it correctly, again with translate and then -50% on the X and Y. But we also want to add a scale. So we can use multiple transforms here. So in addition to translate, we can use scale. And we want to scale it down to 0, to nothing. And we want it to have an animation. So I'll call this animation hide. And we'll say 0.2 seconds for the duration. And then ease, let's do ease out for that. And I got to put my semicolon here. So now if I apply the hide class right here to the div with the class of counter, you can see that that went away. Now for the animation, we're going to use a keyframe. So let's say at keyframes, and we called it hide. Call it whatever you want, just make sure it matches this. And we're going to have something happen at 0%, so basically when it starts, and then when it finishes at 100%. So at 0%, we're going to, let's just grab this transform. So that's the default state, right? So scale 0. And then, I'm sorry, scale 1 is the default state. And then we want it to hide. So then we want to set it to scale 0. So we're just giving it a smooth, you can see right here how it just kind of fades in, or fades out, but goes in. Now, for this final, it's going to work in the opposite way. With counter, it's going to show by default, and then we can dynamically add this hide class, which I'm going to remove right now. With final, we're going to actually have it not shown by default, and then when we apply a class of show, then we'll show it. So I'm going to set the scale by default to 0, which will make it go away. And then what we'll do is we'll have a final, a show class on that same div, and I'm just going to copy what I have here in the hide, and instead of scale starting off at scale 0, we want this to be scale 1 because we're showing it. All right, we are going to call an animation here as well to show it, because we want that same kind of effect, that animated scale effect. So let's create keyframes show. So I'm just going to actually copy these to 0% and 100%, but we're also going to add at 30%. I just want to scale it up a little bit, so it'll have like that, you know, it'll scale up just for a second and then scale back down. So let's grab this. So for 0%, we want that to be 0. Okay, because remember we're showing it, so we're starting with it hidden, and then we're going to scale it up to 1.4, so a little more than, you know, the default 1, and then finally we'll end up at 1. So let's save that. Now if we apply the class of show here, you see how it came in. When I keep saving, you can see the effect. Okay, and if I add hide here, you can see the effect. All right, but we'll be applying those with JavaScript. So I'm going to get rid of both of those for now, and we should only see the counter right now. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and finish up the styling for the numbers, and then we have a couple other animations to do. Right now we took care of, you know, the counter going out and the final coming in, but we need to do this animation of the actual numbers coming in and out. All right, so we're going to get to that next. Okay, so now we want to start to work on the numbers and that animation. So first thing we're going to do is style nums. So remember we have the class of nums, and we're going to give the nums a color of a hexadecimal value of 3498 dB. Okay, so we'll give it that blue color, and then we want to increase the font size a lot, so let's do 50 pixels, and we're going to position this relative because the span inside that are around each number, we want those to be positioned absolute, so the container should be positioned relative. And we're also going to set the overflow to hidden because we don't want anything to go out of the container, and we want to set a width and a height on this. So we're going to set the width to 250 pixels, and we're going to set the height to the same as the font size, which is 50 pixels. All right, now we only want actually, you know what, let's position the numbers first. We want the number to show right in the middle here, so what we'll do is take the spans that are in the nums, and we want to position those to be absolute within its container, within nums. And then we also want to set the position to, let's do from the top 50% and from the left 50%. Okay, and then what we'll do is to fix that positioning, we'll add a transform. I'm sorry, that was backwards. Transform translate, and then negative 50%, negative 50%. Okay, and now you can see that it's right in the middle. Now we want to start off with a little bit of a rotation, because you can see that the way these numbers come in, they come like that, and they turn, they rotate. So we're going to start this off, let's say rotate, and we're going to do 120 degrees. So it's going to start off like that. Now we want to change what's called the transform origin. We don't want, when this starts off, we don't want it to start here. We want it to start here when it rotates up like this. So let me just show you real quick. Transform origin. So right here you can see it's set to center, but what I'm going to do is set it to the bottom center. So if I do that, you can see that it's positioned differently. It's going to come from here rather than smack dab in the middle like that. All right, so it's just going to move it down. You could also do like top center. It could come from that way. So you can change, you know, how it rotates. So I'm going to go ahead and set the transform origin, and let's set it to bottom center. And as soon as I save that, we're not going to see anything here. Now if this 120 degrees was set to 0, then we would be able to see it. And what I'm going to do is take the class of in, because remember we have this class of in that starts on the 3, and have that at 0 degrees, so that's in focus right here. So let's say nums, and we want to grab the span that has the class of in, and then let's go ahead and take this line here and just change this to 0 degrees, and that way we can see whichever number has that class on it. Now we also want to add our animation to the in class, and we're going to call this animation go in. It'll be a duration of 0.5 seconds, and it'll be, whoops, I forgot my colon here, and then it'll be an ease, let's do ease in out effect. Okay, because essentially what we want is it to come, you know, from here and go over like that, like you can see here. All right, so each number that's coming in has that go in, and then we'll have a go out to go this way, and we're going to use transform rotate to be able to do that. So we might as well create the out as well. I'll just copy this. So we'll have a class of out, and this isn't going to have the starting point here, so we can get rid of that. We're just going to call an animation called go out. So let's create both of these animations, these keyframes. So we'll say keyframes, and this will be the go in animation. Now we're going to have multiple states here, so let's do 0%. It's going to be our starting point. Then we'll have a 30%, and then a 60%, and then a 100%, which is where it will end. So we just want different levels of rotation in these different states. So I'm going to copy this line here, the transform, translate, and rotate. And we're going to start at 120, and because we're going to be, out over here. And then at 30%, I'm actually going to go to -20, because I don't want it to go right just from 120 to 0, because I want to have this little bounce effect. So you can see how it kind of goes forward and then back. If you want, you can do just 120 to, and then put, down here 0. That's fine. But if you want that bouncy effect, we're going to go -20 at 30%, and then we're going to go to 10 degrees at 60%, which will give it that effect. And you can see when I save it, you can see how it works. If I take out this and do it, it just comes right in. And it's slower because remember that no matter what, the duration is always going to be 0.5 seconds. All right, so that's go in. Now we want to create our go out. So I'm just going to copy this, and let's change this to go out. And we want to start at 0 degrees now, because remember, we're starting here and we're going out. So start at 0 degrees, and then we don't need a 30%, but at 60, I want to go to 20 degrees. And then at 100, I want to go to -120, which is obviously the opposite of 120. So -120 will be over here. All right, so that should do it. The last thing I want to do is just style this H4. I probably should have done that earlier. I'm going to put that up here somewhere. Let's just say H4. And I'm just going to set the font size to 20 pixels and margin 5 pixels. And let's make it uppercase, so text transform is going to be uppercase. There we go. Okay, so we have our CSS done. Now we have to do a couple things in the JavaScript. We need to control when we want to show this and when we want to show our final message. We also need to basically loop through these spans here and add and remove the in and out class so that we can have that animation happen continuously. All right, so we're going to do that in the next video. Okay, so now we want to make this thing dynamic, and there's a few things we're going to do in our JavaScript file. We want to run our animation. We also want to control when the counter shows and when the final message shows. So first thing we'll do is bring in bring in the stuff that we need from the DOM. So we need the numbers. So we're going to use document dot, and then since there's multiple spans that we need to bring in, we're going to actually use query selector all. And we want to bring in the class, we'll say nums, and then the spans within nums. All right, now query selector all is used if there's multiple elements that you're selecting, and what it does is it puts it into what's called the node list, which is kind of like an array. You can use for each on it. You can use array methods and stuff like that. So next thing I want is the counter itself. So let's say counter and document dot, and it's just a single element, so we can just use query selector. And we want the class of counter. Let's copy that down. We also want the final message, so that has a class of final, and we'll call this final message. And then we want the replay as well, so say replay, and that I believe is an ID, so we want to change this to number sign and then replay, or you can use get element by ID. So we want to call a function here when this starts called run animation, because we want it to run right when it starts. So let's call that, and then let's create that function. All right, now we want to deal with these nums here that we're bringing in, the 3 through 0. So I want to loop through those. So I can take nums, which is a node list, because we use query selector all, and like I said, a node list is similar to an array, and we can actually use the for each method to loop through. So for each, we'll take in a function. You can put in function like that, or you can use an arrow function, which is a bit cleaner. And what this takes, what this callback that we put into for each takes is whatever we want to call this, num, item, whatever you want to call it. It just represents each individual item in the node list or in the array. And then you can pass in a second parameter of index, which will just be, it'll start at 0, and then when it goes through the next iteration, it'll be 1, and then 2, and so on, because we're going to need the index. So within this loop, let's go ahead and actually let's console log just so I can show you. If we console log num and index, and we go ahead and open up our dev tools here, you can actually see, let me put this down here, you can see each span. So the span is what we're getting right here, num. It's not just the num, this is an element that we brought in, the span, so it's going to show the entire element. And then the 0, this is the index, so it starts at 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3. So we have access to those within this loop. Now I'm going to create a variable here to get the next to last value, because we're going to need that in order to do what we need to do. So I'm going to get the total length of nums using the length property and just -1 from that. Okay, next thing we want to do is create an event listener, because we want to know when the animation ends. And there's actually, let's close this up, there's actually an event listener called animation end. So I'm going to take num, so basically whatever iteration we're on, whatever item or whatever number, and let's add an event listener to that. And when we get an animation end event, okay, so just animation end, we're going to fire off a function with an event parameter here. And we want to first check to see if the animation that's ending, if the name is go in. And we can do that using that event parameter. So this E here, actually we can say animation name. That'll give us whatever the animation name is, and we want to see if it's equal to go in. Okay, we also want to see if the index is not the last. So let's do double ampersand, and then we want to take test the index and see if that's not equal to. And what I'm going to do here is just, actually, yeah, we'll just add next to last here. So if that's true, then we want to take the current number and we want to remove the in class and then add the out class. And that's what's going to give it that, in and out effect. So let's take num and use class list, and then we can use the add method to add a class. And I'm sorry, we want to remove in first. So we're going to remove in, and then we're going to add out. Okay, and all that's doing is taking in off of the current number and adding out, which in turn is going to call this, which will then rotate it down that way. Okay, so the second condition here that I want to check for, let's say else if, and right here we're removing, if it's go in, then we're removing the in class, adding the out. Now we want to check to see if it's go out. So let's say if e.animation name is equal to go out, and we also want to see if there's a number after it, because we don't want to add an in class if there's no next element. And we can do that by checking, let's say and num dot, and then there's a method called next element sibling, which will see if there's a next sibling. So these spans are all on the same level, so they're siblings. So if we're here, it's going to check to see if this exists. If it does, it's going to add the class of in. If not, then it's not, because there's no more spans. All right, so we'll say num dot next element sibling, and then in here we want to take num dot next element sibling, and we want to add the class of in. Okay, so class list dot add, because we want to add it to the next one, right, not to the current number. So that's why we're using next element sibling here, and then we're adding the in class. Okay, and then else, that means that we're done, so we want to show the final message and hide the counter. So let's say counter.classList, and we want to add on to that. Remember, we have that hide class. Okay, and then we're going to take the final message and we want to add the show class. Okay, so when it's done with, it's just going to show that final message. So I'm going to save that, and now you can see, there we go. So the last thing we need to do in our JavaScript is call this this replay here. We want to be able to click this and have it happen again. So let's create a function up here, and we're just going to call this reset DOM, because we're basically just resetting it to its starting state. So we'll take counter and class list dot remove, and we want to remove the hide class, and then on the final message we want to then remove the show class. Okay, and then we want to loop through the numbers again, so nums.forEach, and this takes in a function, so we'll say num. So for each number, I just want to clear the value, so we'll do num.classList.value and set it to just an empty string. All right, and then here we want to add the class of in to the first span. So nums is a node list, which is similar to an array, so we can access specific elements. So 0 is actually going to give me the first one here, and we want to add this class of in to it, right? So let's say nums 0 class list dot add, and we want to add in. All right, so that will kind of just reset everything to this initial state here. Now we want this to happen when we click this button, so let's take the replay and let's add an event listener, and we want to listen for a click event, and when that happens we're going to call a function, and we want to reset DOM, and we also want to run animation. Alright, so we'll save that. So as soon as this ends, you can see that we get this go. Let's actually center that. I don't know why we didn't center that. So let's see, final message, or final, and let's say text. Let's do text align center. There we go. Okay, so if I click replay, there we go, it happens again. Okay, so that should do it. So we have this cool little animation, and you could implement this into some kind of website or app so that you show your, you show your screen once it loads. You could do a bunch of things with it, but that's it for this project, and let's jump into the next one.